The night was drowned in silence until the phone buzzed alive, its screen flickering with a number Daniel had never seen. He pressed play, and the voicemail carried a trembling voice whispering, "They know where you are." The sound sliced through the stillness like a knife. He froze, staring into the darkness of his living room, shadows stretching longer with every second. Then came static, followed by silence, but not for long. A scream erupted, raw and piercing, spilling from somewhere outside. Daniel dropped the phone, his breath catching in his throat. He stumbled toward the window, eyes scanning the street, yet there was nothing but the still night. His heart pounded as he stepped outside barefoot, the pavement cold against his skin. A strange object lay in the middle of the road, small, metallic, and impossibly out of place. Strange markings twisted across its surface, symbols he could not read, symbols that felt older than language itself. Daniel whispered, "What the hell is this?" as the wind picked up, carrying a faint echo that made the night feel alive with unseen watchers. Daniel returned inside, gripping the object as though it might vanish. He set it on the table, staring at the markings twisting like veins. The silence pressed harder, broken only by the faint ticking of a wall clock. He muttered, "It's nothing, just trash." Yet he knew he was lying. He tried to call back the number, but the line was dead, no signal, no trace it had ever existed. Shadows flickered across the walls, his own movements turning sinister in the dim light. Every creak of the floorboards seemed deliberate, as if someone else moved unseen. He pressed his palms against his eyes, whispering, "Get a grip." But the air felt heavy, charged, carrying the memory of the scream. The object remained silent, but its presence radiated unease. Daniel felt as though it was waiting for something, and the thought burrowed into his mind, refusing to leave. Morning brought no relief. The object still sat on the table, mocking him with its silent defiance. In daylight, the markings were sharper, carved deep, their meaning no clearer. Daniel ran his fingers across the surface, cold and unyielding. He muttered, "It doesn't belong here." The neighborhood outside was alive with ordinary sounds. Dogs barking, cars rolling past, kids laughing, all of it clashing with the unease inside his home. The contrast gnawed at him. He felt trapped, torn between ignoring it and tearing it apart. But he could not let it go. He scribbled the symbols on paper, each line making less sense than before. The paper filled with jagged shapes, and the more he drew, the more wrong they felt. His chest tightened as though each mark invited something closer, something watching. Daniel stepped outside, seeking answers, but found only doubt. He approached his neighbor, Mark, watering his lawn, casual and unconcerned. Daniel asked, "Did you hear anything strange last night? A scream, maybe?" Mark laughed lightly, shaking his head. "No, Daniel, nothing." The denial rattled him. The scream had been real, raw, undeniable, yet Mark spoke as if nothing happened. Daniel's voice cracked. "You didn't hear anything." Mark simply shrugged, unconcerned, eyes drifting elsewhere. Daniel felt exposed, as if his fear was on display. The normalcy of the street pressed in like a suffocating weight. Maybe no one else had heard because it wasn't meant for them. Maybe it had been meant only for him. That night, Daniel stood by the window, unable to sleep. The object glowed faintly where it rested, the symbols alive in the dark. His breath fogged the glass as he watched the street. Then he froze. Across the road, just beyond the streetlight, a figure stood still, watching. Daniel whispered, "Who are you?" But the figure gave no reply. It lingered for a moment, still as stone, then slipped into the shadows with unnatural quiet. His heart pounded, his fists clenched. The night swallowed the figure whole, leaving only silence. Daniel backed away from the window, the house suddenly colder, as though the darkness had stepped inside with him. Morning light crawled across Daniel's walls like a slow confession, revealing the mess of notes and sketches he made. He brewed coffee he barely tasted, counting heartbeats between creaks. He opened a box he avoided for years. Inside lay a recorder from a case that ended badly. Daniel said, This is not the same, but it rhymes. He played an old interview and flinched at the echo of fear. The voice from last night felt like a cousin to that memory. He called Claire and let it ring, then hung up before voicemail. Daniel said, "I need to be better than I was." He studied the strange symbols until they stirred a headache that felt electrical. He wrote them again and again, hoping repetition might tame them. Outside, a dog barked, and normal life pressed its face to his window. Daniel said, "Not today." The house waited with him, patient and cold. Daniel met Claire at a quiet diner off Route 6, where the coffee was strong and the music was low. She slid into the booth and read his face before speaking. Claire said, "You look like you slept in a storm." He told her about the voicemail and the scream, leaving out nothing. Claire said, "You promised no more chasing ghosts." He placed the metallic object on a napkin, symbols dull in the neon glow. Claire did not touch it. She watched the door as if someone might join them uninvited. Daniel said, "I think this is connected to something old." Claire said, "Or someone wants you to think that." The waitress passed with a pot, and both flinched at the hiss. Daniel lowered his voice until it became a thread. He asked for help he rarely asked for. Claire said, "I will help, but we do this my way." When Daniel returned home, a plain white envelope waited on his doormat. No stamp, no name, only a crease like a held breath. He locked the door before opening it. Inside lay a single note, written in sharp, slanted strokes. It read, "Don't trust them." He turned the note over and saw a faint impression of the same symbols. Daniel said, "Who is them?" He checked the windows and saw no one. The quiet felt staged, like a set between takes. He held the note to a lamp and watched hidden fibers shine. Daniel said, "You were here." The air carried a trace of rain and cheap cologne. He followed it to the back door and found nothing disturbed. Somewhere a car idled, then drove away. Daniel kept the note under the object, like a pack. Daniel said, "Message received." The next morning, Daniel stepped to his car and stopped cold. Thin scratches ran along the door in looping patterns. The symbols were there, etched with care, not rage. Daniel said, "You took your time." He traced a line and felt grit under his finger. Neighbors walked dogs and waved, unaware of the ritual carved into metal. He snapped photos and compared them to his notes. The shapes matched with unsettling precision. Claire arrived in a hurry and stared at the damage. Claire said, "Someone wants you rattled and seen." She suggested he file a report, but his gut rebelled. Daniel said, "Not yet." They debated in hushed tones until the wind lifted a paper from his wiper. It bore a map fragment with a red X near the old mill road. Claire said, "A trap or a test?" Daniel said, "Maybe both." That night, the phone lit without ringing, the screen awake like an eye. A new voicemail waited with no missed call. Daniel pressed play and braced. The same quivering voice returned, now barely a whisper. It said, "They are in the walls," then cracked into static. He paused the message and listened to his house answer with settling wood. Daniel said, "You are not here." Yet he moved room to room as quietly as he could. He placed the recorder on the table and watched the levels dance in silence. Claire stayed on the line from her apartment. Claire said, "Keep me with you." He replayed the message and heard another sound beneath the static, a muffled knock or breath. Daniel said, "There's a second voice." He marked the time code and sat with his back to the door. The night pressed closer, patient and intent. The map fragment weighed heavy in Daniel's pocket as he drove toward the edge of town. The old mill road was nearly forgotten, swallowed by weeds and silence. Claire sat beside him, her eyes sharp on the passing trees. She said, "This is too neat, Daniel." He gripped the wheel tighter, headlights carving tunnels through the fog. Daniel said, "Neat or not, it points somewhere." The road ended at an iron gate chained shut, but rusted thin. They climbed over, boots crunching gravel. Ahead loomed a house, 2 stories high, abandoned long enough for vines to choke its bones. Daniel whispered, "This is it." Claire said, "I hate that you sound certain." The night hummed with cicadas, yet the house stood too quiet, too still. He pulled out the metallic object, holding it like a key. For a moment, the markings shimmered faintly, as if recognizing the place. Inside the abandoned house, their flashlights cut across walls where paint peeled in long strips. Dust motes floated like ash, stirred by every step. Claire said, "Feels like walking into lungs." Daniel's beam caught on a mirror cracked into spiderwebs. His reflection looked warped, his eyes hollow. Daniel whispered, "Someone left in a hurry." Broken furniture lay stacked against the walls, as though blocking something, not thieves. The air grew colder the deeper they stepped. Claire ran her hand along the wall, and froze when she felt a groove. She leaned in, revealing symbols etched into plaster. Claire said, "Same as your object." Daniel pressed his palm against the markings and felt a vibration beneath the surface, faint like a heartbeat. His skin prickled as whispers brushed past his ears, too faint to understand but too close to ignore. They entered a room lined with old clippings pinned to the walls. Newspaper pages yellowed with time told stories of missing people, unsolved crimes, and unexplained vanishings. Photographs with faces circled in red hung crooked paper curling. Claire covered her mouth, whispering, "These are decades old." Daniel stepped closer, his stomach tightening when he saw his own father's face in one grainy photo. He whispered, "No, that's impossible." Claire pulled the clipping free and read, her voice trembling. Local man questioned, case dropped. Daniel's chest burned as if the air had turned to smoke. He said, "Why would they keep this?" A chill spread across his back, heavier than memory. The voices returned, louder, overlapping, whispering names he almost recognized. Claire dropped the clipping, her hands shaking. She said, "Someone wanted you here." Daniel's breath quickened as footsteps echoed above, though the floor above had collapsed years ago. He looked at Claire, and her eyes widened the same moment. Claire said, "We're not alone." They turned off flashlights, letting moonlight from broken windows guide them. From the shadows stepped an ally Daniel did not expect. Jonah, an old contact, his face rough and eyes watchful. Jonah said, "You should not have come." Daniel whispered, "Then why are you here?" Jonah glanced at the walls and lowered his voice. "They're listening." Claire demanded, "Who?" He only shook his head, stepping closer with caution, as if the house itself might punish him for speaking. Jonah pulled a small device from his pocket, clicking it on. A faint hum filled the room, drowning the whispers for a moment. Jonah said, "That buys us time, nothing more." Jonah led them deeper into the house, guiding with the device humming in his hand. He stopped near a broken table, bending to pull a recording unit hidden beneath loose boards. Jonah said, "They've been watching you." Daniel's throat tightened. "Me? Why?" Jonah's eyes flicked toward the object in Daniel's pocket. "Because you're holding their key." Claire gritted her teeth. "Who are they?" Jonah's jaw worked as though he wanted to answer but couldn't. Instead, he powered on the recorder, and a distorted voice filled the air. It was Daniel's own voice, recorded without his knowledge, describing moments he never spoke aloud. His stomach lurched, and he grabbed the device. Daniel shouted, "How do they have this?" Jonah whispered, "Because they're already inside your life." The house seemed to groan with the weight of his words, as if agreeing. Claire stood rigid, her flashlight trembling as she admitted what Daniel suspected. She said, "I knew about the whispers before you ever told me. I heard them years ago but stayed silent." Daniel's heart clenched as her confession cut deep. He whispered, "Why didn't you tell me?" Claire's eyes filled with regret, her voice cracking, "Because speaking of them makes them stronger." Jonah shifted uneasily, his gaze darting to the shadows, as if expecting them to answer. The air thickened, vibrating faintly like a low hum beneath their words. Daniel said, "So you let me walk blind into this?" Claire lowered her head, tears streaking her cheeks. "I thought ignoring it kept us safe." Her words burned, not with betrayal alone, but with the weight of shared fear. The silence after her admission carried a presence, as though the house itself listened and approved. They pressed deeper into the house, where a narrow stairway led to a locked door. An old man waited there, sitting in a broken chair, his eyes sharp and unblinking. His clothes were ragged, but his presence commanded silence. He said, "The markings are warnings, not threats." Daniel stiffened. "You know them?" The man's lips twisted into a crooked grin. He said, "They guard the border between here and what listens." Claire asked, "Border to what?" He leaned forward, eyes wide with madness and clarity combined. "To what never sleeps." Jonah muttered. "Eccentric doesn't cover it." Yet Daniel felt truth behind the man's riddles. The carved walls pulsed faintly, and the symbols seemed alive under the beam of their lights. The man tapped his temple and whispered, "You brought the key, and keys open both ways." As tension mounted, the sound of shattering glass echoed through the lower hall. A figure burst in, one they had long believed to be an enemy. Marcus, once thought to be behind the terror, dragged Daniel back from a collapsing beam. His voice was sharp. "You want answers, you leave now." Daniel fought against his grip. "You're the one who's been pulling strings." Marcus snarled, "No, I've been trying to stop them." Claire raised her flashlight, torn between striking him or trusting him. Jonah stepped between them, eyes narrowed. "This makes no sense." Marcus gestured at the walls, where the markings bled faint red light. "They want you trapped here. I want you alive." The house groaned like a living creature, and dust rained from the ceiling. Claire whispered, "Then prove it." They retreated to a narrow corridor where Marcus finally spoke with urgency. "The real threat isn't me," he said. "It's closer than you know." Daniel felt bile rise, his voice raw. "You expect me to believe you?" Marcus glared. "You think I'd risk stepping into this cursed house for lies?" Claire muttered, "Closer than we know?" That could mean anyone. Jonah remained silent, his face unreadable as shadows painted him strange. The air pressed heavy against them, and faint footsteps echoed though no one moved. Daniel whispered, "Then who?" Marcus only said, "The one you trust most." Silence thickened as eyes shifted, suspicion carving cracks between them. Claire looked away, shame from her earlier confession cutting deep. The corridor walls creaked, symbols glowing as though fed by their mistrust. They found a small chamber, hidden behind warped boards. Inside lay a table covered in files, photographs, and old cassette tapes labeled with names. Daniel's hands shook as he rifled through them, finding photos of himself from years past, every detail of his life recorded. Claire whispered, "This is surveillance." Jonah picked up a file, his jaw tight. "It's everyone. Not just you." Marcus growled, "This is their ledger." Daniel pulled one cassette and played it on an old recorder. His father's voice filled the room, speaking of debts and secrets Daniel never knew. He dropped the device, his chest heavy with betrayal and revelation. Claire placed a hand on his shoulder, but her touch felt distant. Marcus said, "Now you see, they're inside your circle, not outside it." The truth settled like a stone, heavier than fear. The chamber grew suffocating as Daniel's trust cracked under the weight of revelations. He clutched the files tighter, staring at Claire with suspicion heavy in his voice. Daniel said, "You knew more than you told me. How much of this is yours?" Claire recoiled, her lips trembling. "I swear I didn't betray you." Jonah's eyes narrowed, his silence sharpening into judgment. "No," Marcus snarled. "This is what they want, to turn you against each other." Daniel shook his head, rage rising like fire. "Then why does every path lead back to people I trust?" Claire tried to step closer, but Daniel pulled away, his chest heaving. The sound of creaking boards overhead pressed down like footsteps of an unseen judge. The air between them became jagged, filled with betrayal and fear. Jonah muttered, "Someone delivered us here." The chamber door rattled as if in agreement. Daniel's anger broke through as he confronted Marcus directly, pointing to the recorder on the table. Daniel shouted. You manipulated this from the start. Marcus slammed his fist against the wall, sending dust cascading. Marcus barked. I kept you alive when they wanted you gone. Claire shouted over them. Stop. You are feeding the thing in this house. Jonah's voice was colder. Truth doesn't care about your shouting. Daniel stepped closer to Marcus, faces inches apart, tension electric. Marcus growled. You want answers? Then listen instead of blaming. His eyes burned with sincerity and fury. Daniel's breathing slowed, but distrust lingered sharp as glass. Claire placed herself between them, trembling but firm. Claire said, if we tear each other apart, none of us leave. The symbols on the wall pulsed faint red, feeding off their conflict. Suddenly, a scream tore through the silence, raw and final. They bolted from the chamber, following the sound to the main hall. There, a man Daniel didn't know lay sprawled, his chest rising faintly before stilling forever. Blood stained the dust beneath him, his face twisted in terror. Claire gasped, her voice shaking. An innocent. He was dragged into this. Daniel knelt beside the body, hands trembling as he searched for signs of life. None came. Jonah's jaw tightened, muttering, the house feeds on victims. Marcus cursed under his breath. We're next if we don't move. The stranger's lifeless eyes reflected the faint glow of the markings overhead. Daniel whispered, he didn't deserve this. The scream echoed in memory long after his voice was gone, a reminder that the walls weren't just watching. They were hunting. The air split with sirens in the distance, but no squad car approached. Moments later, heavy boots echoed, and Sheriff Dalton appeared in the doorway, his uniform dusty, his badge dulled. Daniel exhaled finally, but Dalton's eyes betrayed no comfort, only calculation. Dalton said, I told you not to come back here. Claire snapped. You knew what this place was, didn't you? Dalton adjusted his belt, avoiding her gaze. Jonah muttered, broken authority in the flesh. Marcus squared up, suspicion heavy in his voice. You're part of this. Dalton raised a hand, silencing them. You don't know the danger you've unleashed. His words carried fear, not command. Daniel demanded, then tell me what you're hiding. Dalton's silence stretched long, broken only by the groaning beams above, as if the house weighed judgment. The confrontation broke when the floor beneath them groaned and splintered. A trapdoor hidden under dust swung open, revealing a pit lined with jagged wood and rusted metal. Daniel staggered back as debris fell around them. Marcus yelled, It's a trap! Claire screamed as the floor tilted, dragging her toward the edge. Daniel lunged, grabbing her arm, his muscles straining against gravity. Jonah slammed his weight against the wall, trying to steady the collapse. Dalton pulled Claire up with Daniel, saving her from the pit. But his eyes burned with something unspoken, as though he had known the trap was there all along. Daniel gasped, his voice hoarse, How much of this did you already know? Dalton stayed silent, his silence louder than truth. The pit below gaped like a hungry mouth, waiting for another chance. The recorder whined as another hidden message played. A voice Daniel knew but never expected. It was his father's voice, broken but clear, whispering, They know where we are. Daniel staggered back, his chest hollowing as if air abandoned him. Claire's eyes widened, her voice a rasp, Your father. But he's dead. Daniel whispered, He's been gone for years. Jonah muttered, Or someone made sure you believed that. Marcus growled, You were marked from the start. Sheriff Dalton shifted uncomfortably, gaze fixed on the ground. Daniel replayed the tape, straining against disbelief, every word like a nail into his memory. His father's voice pleaded, Don't trust the ones beside you. Silence followed, heavier than screams. Daniel's hands shook as he said, He's alive, or he's been part of this all along. The house groaned like it agreed, the air alive with betrayal. They pressed deeper into the basement, finding rooms carved from stone rather than wood. On the walls, old inscriptions mirrored the metallic object symbols. Claire whispered, This house wasn't built, it was unearthed. Jonah touched the wall, his hand trembling. "It's older than us," Marcus muttered, "older than language itself." Daniel pressed the object to the markings and felt the vibration pulse like a heartbeat. The stones hummed, their symbols glowing faintly as whispers swelled. Claire backed away, clutching her chest as if the sound pressed against her lungs. Daniel whispered, "It's been here longer than anyone admitted." Sheriff Dalton finally spoke. This place was never meant to be found. His tone carried guilt, not warning. The room shook as if something buried stirred, and dust rained down like falling ash. Daniel said, "We're not in control anymore." A second voice emerged from the recorder, layered beneath Daniel's father's, cold and vengeful. It spoke Daniel's name as if savoring it. Claire whispered, "That's not him." Marcus said, "It's the one behind him." Jonah's face hardened, his voice sharp. "Vengeance drives it. Someone betrayed someone, and now it wants more." Daniel shook his head, his fists clenching. "Why me?" Dalton muttered, "Because blood remembers. This isn't random." Daniel's throat tightened as realization hit that the object, the whispers, and the house tied to his family's hidden sins. Claire touched his arm, her voice trembling. "You can still end it." Daniel's eyes burned with fury and fear. He whispered, not without answers. The air shifted, colder, and shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, as if the house itself leaned closer to hear. The whispers grew louder as the group entered another room, its walls lined with names carved deep into stone. Claire whispered, "These are victims." Jonah traced one with his finger, whispering, "They kept records here." Daniel scanned the names until his stomach dropped. His own was etched near the bottom. He stumbled back, his breath catching. Daniel said, "They knew me before I was born." Marcus muttered, "This is prophecy, not memory." Dalton cursed under his breath, "We should have burned this place when we had the chance." Daniel's voice cracked, "Why is my name here?" The whispers swelled into laughter, mocking and cruel. Claire covered her ears, shaking her head. Jonah said, "Because you're meant to finish what was started." The words hung in the air like chains, unbreakable and heavy. At the center of the chamber, a heavy wooden table held photographs, ledgers, and symbols carved into its surface. Daniel slammed his hands down, voice trembling. "Why me? Why my family?" Dalton's silence cracked as he confessed, "Because your father made a deal. He traded safety for silence, and you're the price." Daniel staggered, fury and despair ripping through him. Claire whispered, "He tried to protect you, but it chained you instead." Marcus growled, "So the truth is vengeance dressed as inheritance." Jonah leaned forward, voice hard, "This is your confrontation, Daniel. The rest of us are shadows to it." Daniel's chest burned as he screamed into the chamber, "Then I'll break it." The whispers stopped, replaced by an unnatural stillness, as though the house paused, waiting for his next breath. The chamber fell silent after Daniel's defiance, but silence came with cost. The walls no longer pulsed, yet his body trembled, drained as if pieces of him had been taken. Claire knelt beside him, her voice breaking. "You stopped it, but at what price?" Marcus scanned the room, muttering, "It's not gone, only waiting." Jonah nodded grimly. He pushed it back, but the tether remains. Sheriff Dalton finally raised his eyes, guilt carved deep, whispering, "This will haunt you, Daniel. It never ends clean." Daniel closed his eyes, whispering, "I paid enough." The chamber felt lighter, but the weight on his shoulders promised scars that would never fade. They climbed out of the basement as dawn cracked through the broken windows. The light painted the dust gold, turning ruin into uneasy beauty. Claire whispered, "We survived the night." Marcus muttered, "Survival doesn't mean victory." Jonah glanced back at the stairs, jaw tight. The house still breathes. Daniel stepped into the open air, every inhale sharp like lungs relearning freedom. Sheriff Dalton lingered at the threshold, his voice quiet. "The sins we bury have roots deeper than we think." Daniel looked at him, but no words came. The morning was alive with birdsong, but every sound felt fragile, temporary, as if silence waited to reclaim it. They walked away from the house, silence hanging like a veil. But behind them, on the porch, a figure stood motionless. Jonah froze, his voice low. "We're still being watched." Claire turned slowly, her breath catching. A tall figure cloaked in shadow observed without moving, no features visible, no sound but the wind. Daniel whispered, "The silent one." Marcus hissed, "Don't engage." The figure tilted its head slightly, as though curious, then remained still. Sheriff Dalton's hand twitched near his holster, but never drew. They turned their backs again, but the presence lingered heavy, pressing into their spines. Jonah muttered, "This isn't over, not by a long shot." Back at Daniel's home, exhaustion pressed heavier than fear. He set the metallic object on the table, its symbols now faint scars. Claire sat near, whispering, "It followed us." Jonah leaned against the wall, muttering, "It always does." Marcus scanned the window as if expecting visitors. Dalton poured himself a drink with trembling hands, silent in his shame. Daniel flipped the recorder on, but no voice answered. Only faint static that ebbed like a fading breath. He whispered, "We ended nothing. We just carried it here." The house creaked, his own walls now strangers. Claire's eyes glistened, and for the first time, Daniel realized safety was an illusion he could no longer afford. Night fell again, and Daniel lay awake, unable to close his eyes. The recorder lit by itself, its reels turning without sound. He sat up, staring as the faintest whisper filled the room. It said, "You broke the chain, but you are the link." His breath froze, and the words carved themselves into silence. Claire stirred from the couch, asking softly, "Daniel, what is it?" He didn't answer. He watched the object pulse faintly, alive once more. He whispered only to himself, "It's not over." The whisper returned, mocking and soft. It never was. The light died, but the darkness stayed.